So this session's designed to introduce us to the National Church Life Survey 2021, and we'll be looking at the thinking behind the development of the NCLS, how it's coming through this year in 2021, and explaining that this is the Standing Committee's project for this year in the Presbytery, helping the congregations engage with NCLS. So we'll talk about the sponsorship later on in this session. So we'll look at the purpose of the NCLS and some of the practical details, and look at the outcomes for congregations as well as for the Presbytery and the wider church. So first of all, the National Church Life Survey has been going for 30 years. It began with some people from the Uniting Church and the Anglican Church in Sydney, and then picked up the Catholic Church and a host of other denominations who have become either participants or even partners in the National Church Life Survey. So, for example, the Uniting Care, as we know it, is a partner, as is Baptist Care. So those are significant organisations. It's connected up now with Charles Sturt University's theology department, so there's a research base behind it. The National Church Life Survey is able to fulfill purposes for different groups, and obviously we're here to think about the purposes in terms of congregations, but we'll also bear in mind the other uses of the survey. So first of all, there's a bigger picture. Every 5 years, the Australian nation conducts a census, and the National Church Life Survey for the last 30 years, since 1991, has been conducted in association with the census. So we're able to compare notes between what's going on within the church and within the wider nation. And the benefit of the National Church Life Survey is that at times we're able to release some of the research to the press, helping people think about what's going on across Australia. For example, the multicultural nature of our society and how members of our church relate to that. Attitudes towards domestic violence, attitudes towards issues around the environment or refugees and so on. So there have been some really useful research projects that have helped explore those trends across the nation. And of course, the reason that all these denominations have taken part is because they recognise it's helpful for them to understand what's going on in the life of their churches, and helps them do their strategic planning as well as find ways of resourcing people. It's helpful for local churches to focus on their strengths and directions. I know that there have been cases in the past where the National Church Life Survey results have been waved around, chastising congregations or church leaders about their sense of the demise of the church. Things are not going great. You need to get your act together, and people resent any kind of survey being used as a weapon or a tool of shame. So the National Church Life Survey, in its development and in its design and the way it should be used, is about strengths and directions. So just bear that in mind, that the National Church Life Survey team are aware of the ways in which it's been misused and are working hard to make sure that we have the right end of the stick. It's helping the local church leaders realise something about what's going on in terms of their people. One of the questions we've had asked is, well, some of our small churches, everybody knows everybody, so why do we need to do a survey when we already know what everybody thinks? Well, we don't know what everybody thinks. And there's a sense in which the survey unpacks some of the thinking that we might have that is not usually part of our conversation in our congregations. So that will be a useful resource for church leaders. And I was reflecting with the session last night about a minister starting up in October and having a survey in November gives a sense of, okay, this is what we began with at the beginning of my ministry, and the next time the survey's done, they'll be able to reflect back on the journey that I've gone through. So that's a really useful resource for church leaders as a reflecting on directions and consultancy as well. There's also a huge amount of value to researchers who are looking at the nature of the church today, particularly around sociology of religion, people who are reflecting on the nature of church leadership. So in our theological colleges and other places, there are people now doing master's degrees and so on who are mining the data of the National Church Life Survey. Here's the 4 purposes that have been developed. I was actually on the board when we worked on these 4 purposes. And the first one is partnership, when we recognise that sometimes it's hard to be in the room with people from different theologies and different approaches to church. For an example would be in Sydney, the Sydney Anglican Church and the Uniting Church, Hillsong and the Catholic Church aren't always finding it easy to be in a warm place together, but in the National Church Life Survey project, they've found some really useful ways of working together. So that was a refreshing thing, and so that's a valuable part of our contribution to being an ecumenical community in Australia. The next one is having some strong evidence base for our planning and decision making, and that includes working at a congregation level as well as across the wider church. The development of resources that are credible and practical and easy to use, and that's a really important resource for us. And at the end of the day, we want to make sure that churches and leaders are nurtured in their life and health. And those 2 words, life and health, are critical values for everything we do in this process. So how does it work? First of all, in October and November, we have 3 core surveys that we'd be ordering. So we'd be ordering surveys for adults who are 15 and older, and surveys for children who are 8 to 14. So these are the attenders. So it's a 20-minute exercise to fill out the form. It's multi-choice largely, and that gives us a capacity for some data that will be able to be used later. The leader survey is about leadership well-being and a sense of direction and purpose, and we encourage not just the minister but also others in the ministry team who may be ordained or lay, may be employed or not employed, and I would be encouraging people to use this survey to get a sense of how they are seeing themselves as leaders, and it gives us also, as a presbytery, an understanding of the sense of well-being of the leadership teams. There's some real concern about burnout and well-being, so that's part of the leadership survey's purpose. The operations one is about, it's really a census. It's really a chance to get some facts about the congregation, and you've got a bit of time. You don't have to do that on one day. You can actually spend some time getting the information and putting that into the form. Now, I've got examples of those we can look at later if we want to see what those forms look like. The attender surveys are available in paper and also online, so you'll be able to order paper ones and order online surveys as well. So here's the process. In the next 6 weeks, 8 weeks, we'll be giving people the opportunity to order their surveys, and you can order those in 10 languages. Well, you choose which languages you want. There's an expectation that there'll be a minimum of 10 surveys of any of those. So 10 adult surveys or 10 children surveys for the sake of confidentiality. So if you want to have for example, your children's survey included in the results that come back to the congregation, you would need to have 10. But if you have fewer than that, that's okay. They just won't be analysed in the survey. Otherwise, you know exactly who those children are and what they probably thought. So October to November is when you can choose when you're going to have the survey filled out. And we see there it's 20 minutes of any activity of spiritual nature. So it's not just a Sunday morning service. It could be a small group or a youth group. And people can do it online in their own time. They can use a phone or an iPad or a computer to access the survey using a code that you give them. Now we say the reason that, well, one of the reasons we have associated with a worship service and so on is we've found from experience that if you give people forms to take home, you may never see them ever again. So we know that if we say, okay, we're going to spend 20 minutes now doing some reflection on what's happening for us as a congregation, and people can hand them in later at the end of that time, that's the most practical way of ensuring that you get a good return. So that's the main reason. And you'll have the opportunity to choose when you're going to do that over that survey period between October and November. It's been pointed out that you could choose a date and then of course you find you're in lockdown that weekend. So it's very flexible. We've got 8 weeks to choose from, and you can adjust that as you go through. And then at the end of that process, you send the completed surveys to NCLS. If they're online, they're already registered, they're already there, but the paper forms, we send them back in the post, and they are then scanned and processed at the office in Sydney, where they do all the work. The forms have been designed to be processed in a quick way using specialised software. And that software is also designed to produce a result for us. So that's what happens next, is that next year we get the results, and that comes through in a church life pack. One question I've been asked is, so do you have to pay, once the church life pack comes out, then you have to pay for that? Well, the process we're using is that we order the surveys, and then the presbytery pays for the packs. So that's the idea. You don't have a nasty surprise in 6 months' time saying, now you need to pay for this, or send it back, as it happened in the past. So there's a church life profile which has the results. There'll be a workbook with planning processes and some other feedback on what's going on for you in your community. And also the presbytery will receive results as well. So we'll get an overview of what's happening across the presbytery. That will be helpful. And there'll be an overview for the synod, as well as United Church in Australia overall. So what are the outcomes? First of all, there's a research-based evidence for a decision. So it could be used in planning for congregations. It can be used as planning for denominational leaders around priorities and funding. And for example, we've used it at times for helping to shape the way we write our ministry profiles or congregational profiles. And we've also used it in funding applications. So at the bottom line, though, is it's a process designed to resource local churches. And we'll come back to that later on and ways you might use the profile. Here's some of a summary of what we're on about. There's some of the things that we see in the survey that gives us an understanding of church vitality, and this does a lot of the work that the consultation team would spend weeks on. You can do in one day. You've got a measure of your church vitality. which gives an understanding of the congregation, that a consultant or a presbytery minister or a team doing a life and witness survey, they could use this resource. It gives us an understanding of what's happening for our leadership, who's going to church, the demographics, what's going on, what are the trends, and an understanding of the systems and programs that we might need to be thinking about, as well as the church and society. So here's some of the questions that might be explored. For example, what's going on for our intergenerational church? Are we able to actually welcome newcomers? Sometimes we might think, well, no one ever new comes to our church, but you'd be surprised the number of people who don't see themselves as people who've been there forever. So it's good to hear from those people. It's also helpful for us to be addressing our blind spots around cultures and intercultural diversity. There are, as I said before, around sustainable leadership, we have some clues that come through this that help us plan our formation, mentoring and supervision. An interesting process out of this is getting more of a sense of what's happening in terms of the way we see our faith developing and the ways in which people are expressing that in their interaction with the community. So here's some of the local church process. First of all, to make the most of it, you need to have your staff on board, your ministers, your church council, and the congregation getting on board, explaining, okay, this is what we're doing. And let's face it, people don't really like having to spend time writing. Well, some people do, but most people don't like filling out forms. It's something we have to do at times, but we manage to do it. But to have an understanding of the value of this is really helpful. And you can have support from your presbytery ministers. Craig and I, in particular, we're available to help church councils or congregations work with this. And coaches and mentors may be useful moving ahead in terms of how we use this work. So to make the most of it, preparing well and communicating positively to your church. And this is what we're doing today to have this resource. Administering well, being sure that you know that you're going to include people, particularly at this time where some people are not attending in person. We need to think about how we include those people. And when we have the results, we'll need to spend time evaluating what are we seeing and how does it fit with our calling as a congregation. Communicating those things, celebrating them, and being honest about any challenges that may come through and any plans that we're putting into process. And we're with you as congregations as we put together some follow through. So here's some of the things that will come through. First of all, there's these circles here are the areas of work that come through in the survey, and you'll see that there are some strengths that come through. So you'll see, for example, in this example, worship is seen as a huge strength of this congregation and innovation. So that's the first thing to celebrate, the greatest strengths and not as strong. There we are. So recognizing that there are some things are strengths, but they're not as strong. The green sections are not seen as the key indicators of health, but they are attendance measures. So they're not core qualities, but if you're interested in how you're addressing the retention of young adults or newcomers or focusing on attendance change, they will be there. So that's a change that's happened in the last 10 years where these ones were seen as critical to health of congregations, and there's a recognition that's often those things are out of the control of the demographics of a congregation. Okay, here's some ways in which we might use it next year when the results come out in May, April, May. First of all, having even 20 minutes after a church service to celebrate and affirm the things that have come out of the survey. So people have a sense, I took this survey last year, and these are the things we want to celebrate out of what we looked at last year. So that's the first thing. It's a bit like the endorphins that come, that reward us when we go for a run. We know that we've actually achieved something. But then there's another process which might be useful for a church council to start with, which is checking in on your vision, checking in to see how you're going. Do we need to correct any course at all? And then a more in-depth process that congregations may choose by themselves or with support from the presbytery to go through a journey of vision discovery, setting and goals and strategy. So there's potential there for you to use it in different ways. And these are the things that we need to ask about. And of course, there will be value for our denominational leaders, for our church standing committee, for example. So I'm going to stop there and we'll take some questions and then we'll have a look at some more resources. I've got some of those available for us to look at. For example, I've got the 2016 surveys if you want to have a look at those. And I've also got a sample feedback report from 2016 if you want to look at that. First of all, any questions that you might have?
Yeah. Okay. The leaders survey, is that something the church council leaders should, the church council should do, or is it just for ministers and people like that?
The leaders survey, at the very least, your minister if you have one. And I would encourage if the church council would like to take it, I do encourage you to. There's no extra cost. Mm-hmm. So it's actually really useful to have a reflection on your leadership culture. That's really helpful. And it's not just ministers who burn out; it's church council members and others who burn out.
Yes, what happened last time was just letting people know you can do it late if something happens. Like it's not a big problem if you didn't do it immediately on the timetable.
Yes.
Because I got Beric to do it a year later because they hadn't done it at the time that was, it was due. And that related to that was the question of how many surveys for leaders do you get? Because we were given maybe 5 and we had about 10 or 12 counsellors. So I ended up getting to the main office bearers, but it would have been helpful that I didn't have to choose. Like I could get enough for all of us.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know how we do that.
We could. Yes, I think the presbytery could make sure that if you want that option, we can make it clear that that's what we want to do. Yes. Yeah. And yes, you're right, Wendy. A congregation can do the National Church Life Survey at any time. So, for example, if we're doing a consultation with a congregation, we could say, well, let's start with doing the National Church Life Survey to get a snapshot of where things are at now. And that's going to be true for the next 5 years. So we don't have to wait until the census comes around. Yep. But it's still the same cost. Yep.
I was just going to ask about if we're talking about people who might only come occasionally, or if we want to capture those in it. Just wondering if anyone's got any ideas of how we do that. Mm-hmm. If they're not, especially at the moment when they're not sort of coming regularly, but we still want to capture what they're thinking.
Mm. Yes, well, I think that's the benefit of being able to either give people an online form if they're tech savvy enough to do that, or to drop one off to them. So don't get too caught up in this idea that it has to be during a worship service, particularly during COVID. We need to be much more flexible.
I've got a couple of questions, Duncan. So that's kind of partly answered the question, which was just going to be about did you need to pick a weekend, like the census, or can you have it? Could we do it over a period of weekends, for a period of time, because we're likely to be limited in capacity, like limited in number. So it's likely that people won't be able to come. So I'm thinking, how do we capture like our online community and that sort of stuff? So we're going to have to do some thinking about that. So can it be done over a period of time rather than, over a series of weekends rather than one weekend?
Yes. It's okay. So this is not designed to tell the world how many people come to your worship service.
No, but we're wanting to capture
you want to capture the people, what people are thinking in your congregation. There's actually another survey which we haven't talked about, which is $200, which you could actually it's a survey designed for people who are associated with your church who are not members, like the members of the ballet group or the people who attend a play group, and that gives you some feedback on what people are thinking about all kinds of things. So it's another survey which we haven't sponsored, but when I looked at the order form, that's become available for us. That could be something that people want to think about in terms of their friends and partners in the community. But once again, you don't have to do it on a Sunday or in a particular week.
I'm not worried about the number. I'm not worried about the number, but I'm worried about, not worried, I'm just thinking about trying to be inclusive and capture as many people as we can in that process. And if you can't actually have people at church, then it has to be done over a longer period. And children, how do children fill in the children's survey? Do they do that with a parent, or how's that sort of?
The children's survey, which I think I've got a copy of that here to look at, is a lot simpler, and it's designed for children 8 to 14. So they're literate enough to read it and respond, and it's nowhere near as technical as the adult survey, and it's got more of a sense of how do you feel about being part of this church, or what's important for you. So that's it's a good survey. Yeah.
Okay, and just the last thing I just wanted to ask about was the leadership one, and because you'd said before about needing to have 10 to ensure confidentiality. So I just wondered about the difference with that. And, if it was only a minister that filled in, there'd be obviously no confidentiality. Or is it only that person that gets the feedback from that, or how does that work?
My understanding is that the leadership survey, the results come back in a broader sense, not just per congregation. So that the attender survey comes back to the congregation. The leadership survey, the presbytery would have a view, or the synod would have a picture of what's happening for leaders across the whole. So it's not going to give you, as far as I know, the direct feedback, how your minister's feeling about life.
Thanks, Duncan. I was just going to comment in response to Cam's question about the leader survey, like what if you're the only one who fills it in, who gets to see that? I recall being in that position last time around, or it might have been the time before, and I was the only one who had access to kind of what I'd put in, and it actually provided feedback, as I recall, about my own state as the NCLS kind of saw it as a result of the survey. And so it was quite useful for personal reflection, but it certainly didn't go beyond that.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. And Kelly, and then Tom had something to say.
I just wanted to ask, for churches that are hesitant to do it, there was conversations around what was received at the last NCLS. I had a brain fog today. I'm so sorry. The other accruing of letters together. Yes. And what benefits that actually got from that. And so I was just wanting to know whether other people have actually used it and it's been really effective. And I know that you mentioned before, Duncan, there are all these good things about it, but in terms of like day-to-day congregational space, like for me, I'm a sucker for a good form, and I will fill one out just for fun. So I'm like, oh yeah, let's just fill it at all. But what goodness does come from it? So it's just a more broad question.
I'd be interested to see if anybody here has actually used it. Wendy, I know, has. Yes.
Kelly, the reason I've used it many times in many congregations for me as the leader, when I'm going into a new congregation, it's really helpful to get a handle on how people think about particular issues without actually having to sit them down and quiz them each individually. You've got a sort of a broad feeling for their theology, their loves, their hates, that type of stuff. So that's why I asked Beric to do it, even though they hadn't done it when I first arrived. And it also gives me a base to compare, as Duncan said, over a 5-year period. If you're in a placement for a long time, it's really hard to, because you just sort of change gradually, with them as a leader, and to have a chance to actually do a dot and say, this is where we've got to by now. Okay, we've done well in this area. We need to do a bit more work in this area, things like that. It does give you a baseline for applying for grant applications, because they give you a lot of community information as well. So I could see how my congregation's lining up with the community around me. So that's, for example, I used it to get a grant application from Matt Pendle. So I wrote the information based on the NCLS community and census data. And then I could say, look, our community is growing in this department. I need help in this area. And I had the numbers to back that up. There's a whole lot of things I could tell you more, Kelly, but it is useful.
No, that's great. And I appreciate that, because I'm hoping that we can listen to this later. So that would be really good. Thank you.
Last time we did it with Beric, there were some questions that could be taken in more than one way. And because we weren't doing with all the other congregations, I wasn't able to ask anybody to clarify. But now we're doing it en masse. Can we get the form to Craig early so he has a chance to clarify a couple of weird questions? Most of them are straightforward, but there were a couple that Beric certainly struggled with knowing how to answer. I interpreted them in a certain way, but I'm not sure if I was right.
Okay. Well, I think that's the benefit. We'll all be getting these forms arriving, and we'll have a chance like today to sit down and as people organising the surveys, to just do a check. One thing to be aware of is that most of the questions are the same for everybody, but there are some variations in each of the forms, like there's Form A, Form B, Form C and D. And that's designed to get some a broader range of questions. You obviously have a smaller pool of responses to each of those, but that's one of the things to watch out for, is that not everybody's going to be answering exactly the same questions as for parts of the forms. So the other thing is that our forms, I believe, will have some questions which are distinctive to the Uniting Church. So there'll be some senses that there's research being done that we want to know about across the whole of the Uniting Church in Australia. That's particular to us. There's always a bit of a challenge when we talk about how we understand the Bible, and that's been a bugbear of the Uniting Church is that people feel as though, well, we've got this form that is designed to go from everything through from Catholic, Protestant, Pentecostal, and the Uniting Church is a peculiar part of the ecumenical landscape. So trying to get our sense of how that works, and I'm pretty sure the NCLS team are very much aware of that. They're trying to make that work. And the same thing with measuring our confidence in faith and the gospel. That's also trying to avoid the idea that sharing faith is equivalent to taking people to church. That's one of the bugbears that people have, but it's about church life. So there's a sense in which, how do we feel confident about our church as being a place where people can explore faith? Now, Tom?
Presumably when you said the children, if there are less than 10, the congregation won't get it back, but the result, the answers that children give will be included in the overall.
Yes, that's true.
So it's worth, even if you only have 3 children, it's worth getting their opinion.
That's right. It's just it just won't be included in the profile you get.
Yeah. And so secondly, in the leaders survey, are all leaders identified as leaders, or is a church treasurer identified in this survey as a treasurer? Do we get the opinions of treasurers and secretaries and chairs of councils, or are all lay leaders lumped together?
Well, as far as I know, if you're getting a leader form, we don't get a readout on all treasurers and how they're feeling about life. We just get an understanding of leaders in general. Yes.
Okay. And thirdly, when you said we'll compare with other uniting churches, I believe that are we the only presbytery in Victoria that are doing this, or are other presbyteries doing it?
Well, my understanding is we're the only presbytery at this point who have boldly stepped up to pay for everybody's survey. The synod initially said, no, we're not going to take part because we don't know how to use the research. We don't have anybody who's interested in doing that work. So there's been a change in culture over the last year. So, for example, we now have a team of people who are doing some analysis of the community life survey that our congregations have been doing, and we'll be getting feedback on that, which is a first. So there's a new interest in making use of research, and now the synod has boldly agreed to write to presbyteries and congregations saying, look, we support you in taking part of the survey, and that the synod will actually sponsor a cross-section of surveys across all the presbyteries, encouraging presbyteries to take the lead of what we're doing here as well. It might be a bit late, but better late than never.
Thank you.
I'm pretty excited that Port Phillip East is leading the way, and one of the benefits of having Tom Sperling as the chair of the presbytery is that Tom is a real fan of learning from data, from research. So, Tom, do you want to say something about why you see it's important for us to take part?
Well, I reflect essentially what Wendy was saying, that going into any situation, it's always a good idea to have a good understanding of both the quantitative and qualitative research that goes on. So the advantage of the National Church Life Survey, as I said, over the surveys that congregations do for the synod, is that we have both a collection of data, who comes, the church census data, but we also have a lot of qualitative research on people's views, opinions, their attitudes, their values, and their beliefs that help us understand the culture of our congregations and the way that we might plan for the future, given this information. The second thing about the National Church Life Survey, which is very important, is that it's a longitudinal study. It's been going since 1991, and we can see how things change. The third very good thing about it is that it's at the same time as the national census, so that we can compare and contrast the actual makeup and opinions and census of our congregations compared with the community that they're serving. So it gives us a very good idea for how we, as the presbytery of Port Phillip East, can plan our mission into the future when we see both information from this survey and the national census. So I think that I'm very supportive of our presbytery's initiative in supporting this survey, and hope that all congregations take part in it. We have heard that, as Duncan said at the beginning, that sometimes this has been used as to growl at congregations. I can assure you that we're not going to do that this time, and that we're going to have some resources from the presbytery to help congregations respond to the results of this survey.
Yep. Now, would you like to have a look at the forms, the surveys? I've only got the 2016 ones, but I can give you an idea of the flavour of them. So let's have a look at first of all.
Duncan, one of the questions last night was whether this survey has taken any specific notice of the fact that we've been involved in a pandemic the last couple of years. And I tried to find out from the website whether it had. Do you know the answer to that question?
Not that I know of, but there has been a survey that's been done separately, measuring people's response to being in COVID. There's I can give you the link in the chat if you like, looking at how people's faith has responded during COVID, and ways in which people continued to explore faith even though they weren't attending worship regularly. So that was a really useful study, and it certainly helps us thinking about how we support people in growing their faith locally. And I'm sure that the Mission Leadership Development Committee might be wanting to think about how we foster discipleship during COVID. Yeah, so that will be a useful resource for us. So this is the Operation Survey from 2011, and it's really about attendance first of all, congregational character, what's happened. It's interesting. Here's one. This was one of the ones from 2011. Do you have any ministry towards migrants? Do you have non-English speaking congregations meeting for worship? So it's not just a tell us what you do, but there's actually some questions that we wanted to ask across the whole of Australia. How was the Uniting Church involved with engaging with people from different backgrounds? And we also had a project. We wanted to know in 2011 how we're going with church planting across the whole of the country. So there we are. There's quite a range of questions there, and around worship services and so on, mission and service. So you can see this is not a 20-minute exercise. This is actually something that you might want to work on over a couple of weeks to actually get the answers. So here's one. There was one for Anglican churches, children and youth and young adults. We wanted to know about that. Links with schools, faith formation, inclusion. What do you see as going on for your congregation? And as I said last night, you wouldn't want one person to be the only person looking after this. You want to have a team of people who are working together on filling out this form. Okay, so that's that one. And I'll give you a taste of the leadership survey. First of all, there's an explanation of what it's about. And you have a password. You can put your own password so you can see your own results. Is that right, David and Wendy?
Yes.
Okay, and then you have, it could be a minister, an interim minister, a layperson as a principal leader, or a layperson serving as a member of a leadership team. It could be someone like me, a person who is ministering in several congregations, and so on. Which of these leadership roles do you currently perform? So
Duncan, management administrative role.
Yep. So you could actually have the person who is employed as the administration person, or someone who is carrying that out as part of a committee or a task force. A person who has responsibility for pastoral care and visitation. So there's the questions. There's some demographic ones. We want to know where people come from, what's their own background. and then how you lead. What's your approach to leadership? Different leadership styles. We're trying to get an understanding of the different leadership styles across the church. And this is the kind of form that Kelly would love filling out, I imagine. And then there's your own personal foundations and how you feel about your ministry. And then there's your own life and circumstances, testing around burnout and well-being, and this is there's a test around that. Personality. Is this the one that people filled out? Do you remember this one? Oh, this is 2011. It's probably been changed a little bit since then. So that's what I have available on my hard drive from years past.
It's going to take more than 20 minutes to fill that out.
Oh, that one is. That's right. You'd probably spend an evening doing that. Yeah. But remember, the benefit of October, November is this is not meant to be a snapshot on one day. It's designed to be an in-depth exploration of how you're going, and it's designed to help people reflect on them for themselves, how they're going, but also for the wider church to understand some of the dynamics. And once again, the MLDC will find that really helpful, the leadership part of the MLDC. Yeah. As well as our pastoral relations committee. So that'll be helpful. And Wendy says she's got the result forms from Berwick, if people want to see those. And I think I've actually got a sample of a church life survey from 2016. Okay, let's have a look.
I was going to say, for me, the summary, for example, as a new minister coming into a congregation, showing what their major preferences are, meant as a minister, which things you do not step on lightly. These are the things that are really important to them, and there's the areas that they want to work on. Was really helpful to know right at the start.
So first of all, this is what you get at the very beginning, what people value. And this is just an example. So if you know that people really value praying for one another, that's some encouragement. And then you see what people want to give attention to. And if people have an aspiration for a growing sense of community within the church, for example, you know, well, that's something we want to have a conversation about. So that's at the very start. Then you get a demographic profile out of all of this, so you get an understanding of where people are at. And then we get a more detailed picture of the core values of what people see about this church, and what they see as something that they would like to see leaders or the congregation give priority to, and that they're prepared to give priority to. And here we are. What do they think about the groups for children and youth? What do they like about it? The use of gifts and skills. What do people actually would like to offer? Sometimes there's people waiting to be asked, and we think, well, okay, there's actually a whole bunch of people who have some skills in communication that we might be able to make use of. So there we are. That's some really useful data. How people relate to God. And if you know that people hardly ever have a sense of connecting with God, well, that's worth paying attention to. But here we have most people in this group have said most days. What do people appreciate about worship? How they relate to one another? Do they feel a strong sense of belonging? How do children feel about that? How people relate to the wider community, which you don't always know about, but you can have a picture of what's going on and how they engage with their community. And children, what do they see as their acts of service and justice? You get a picture of, do people have a sense of confidence in the vision of the church, and would they support any new initiatives? How do they experience the leadership culture of the congregation? And this is extra information here, which comes from the government census. And next year, once the census is finished, all the results are out, we can order the Community Life Survey, which is an understanding of what's going on in our community within a radius, let's say a 5K radius of the congregation. So that's what we're able to order as well. Here's some other detailed reviews that you get in the survey, in the profile. You get more information about what's going on here. Okay, so that's, yeah, and you have a profile number, which means that you can go and access the profile online, and you can download resources to share with your congregation in this kind of form, as well as in PowerPoint, I believe. So that's going to be a really useful resource for congregations to make use of. One question that came up last night was, do we have to pay just for the paper copies of the survey, or do we need to pay for the online surveys as well? And I went and filled out a sample survey order form online, and found that yes, it doesn't matter whether it's a paper form or an online form. You can say we want to have 25 paper forms and we want to have 35 online forms, and you pay $2 per each of those. And so you don't actually have to pay for those immediately. As the presbytery will be invoiced for the whole lot, and then we'll find a way of congregations contributing for that $2 per person.
Fine. So the cost is for the ones that are ordered, not for the ones that are completed.
That's true. That gives you a bit of motivation to make sure people fill them out and so you can send them back. Yep. Yeah. So yes, the process of working out how many you're going to have is important indeed. And if you find you've run out and you need more, there's always a way of getting those. We can always order more. Yeah. So just to remind you that the overall process is $250, and that's for taking part in the survey. It includes the leader survey, and it includes the operations survey, or the census one, and the presbytery is covering those costs. We've got income that we have called the interest-only mission fund, which we're able to use for paying for this. It's in our budget, and then we're asking congregations to pay for the actual forms. So if you're a congregation of 20, you're paying $40 for the survey. If you're a congregation of 250, well, that's $500. So that's that's where we're spreading the load, and the presbytery is subsidizing heavily the process. And we'd love to be able to sponsor as well the Community Life Survey next year, where we get the information from the Australian Bureau of Statistics survey. Yep. Okay, it's great to be in a presbytery that takes this seriously and is keen to do something with the results and encourage congregations. And we've got some committees ready to go with this and working with the results, aren't we, Kelly? And
yes,
yeah, we're getting.
Yes, Sam's laughing too.
That's right. Yeah. So this is a good thing, and we're glad that people are engaging with this well.